Hello, class. My name is John Knox. Our topic this week is aggression. Simply, aggression is defined as a behavior that is intended to harm another individual who does not wish to be harmed. So, this is a very common experience, probably personally for you and historically for everybody else. In 1930s, actually, Freud was purported to have said that aggression is an innate, independent, instinctual disposition in man that constitutes the powerful obstacle to culture. So, from these two definitions, you could see that aggression, for the most part, is considered to be a negative force in human society. It is also a historical part, and even in like the 16th century, the great reformer Martin Luther said, "Blood alone moves the wheels of history." So, aggression transcends culture, gender, race, age, and it can be demonstrated in a variety of ways, both actively or passively. For the most part, I would say aggression has negative consequences, but there might be a positive aspect to it as well. Negatively, though, you see it coming out physically in violence, hostility, and ferocity. Emotionally, it comes out as like impulse problems that people have, negativity, no forethought or foresight. And cognitively, it could come out kind of rather deviously in that intentional, planned, strategic aggression, whether to gain something or to hurt somebody. Casson Fine and Marcus's chapter 11, in their book, focused upon aggression quite fully, I would say. And they also start out by defining it as behavior intended to hurt another person. And you can see this in both private and public relationships. And, you see it, the characteristics of aggression tend to be violence and anger and hostility, bullying, outrage, cynicism, etc. You can have two different types of aggression. You have proactive aggression, which is for personal gain. Someone wants something, you're in the way, and so they attack you head on. Or it could be reactive aggression, which is just actually for personal enjoyment. There's a bit of sadism on this. There's a wide variety of cultural expressions for aggression, depending upon where you are in the world. In the western part of the world, they're probably more individualistic. In the eastern part, they might be more collective, more in harmony. Subcultures, again, a great variety: age, class, race, region, gender. In fact, what you'll find is some differences. Like, one would not expect an elderly woman to be physically aggressive, but you do expect perhaps a young teenager to be okay with getting into fights. Gender is definitely an issue, and that you could see profound evidence that men are more aggressive than women. Of course, this is most likely due to the hormone that men have called testosterone. Women have it as well. In fact, the more of testosterone you have, the more likely you are to have factors of aggression. People who are aggressive tend to be disagreeable, irresponsible, closed-minded, introverted, and unstable. Psychologists have also come up with this dark triad, this three characteristics of a toxic person, and definitely part of the aggression formula. One is they're narcissistic; they're just all focused on themselves, very self-centered. Two, they're Machiavellian, which is Machiavelli is a book written. Machiavelli wrote a book called The Prince, in which he said leaders have a right to do whatever they want to their subjects as long as the ends justify the means, which of course could lead to immorality and unethical treatment of people, as it has historically. And the final one is psychopathy, where they might have some sort of mental dysfunction, whether congenital or some childhood trauma that has rendered them and their thinking processes flawed somewhat. For the impulsivity, the less self-control a person has, the more aggression that they exhibit statistically. And Casson et al. Talk about the sources of aggression, and it could be nature, like you're born with it, or nurture, that you're socialized with it. Some people believe that aggression comes from sort of an innate, ancient survival tactic that we would use so that we would survive and thrive over others. And this actually even overlaps into mating preferences with women being, statistically more attracted to strong, assertive, aggressive men than passive ones. Although if the aggression is taken too far, that turns into toxic masculinity. So there are definitely genetic, biological, cognitive factors in aggression, which is why some people are more aggressive than others. And testosterone is probably the driving hormone for it. Other people might be lacking a hormone that stops others from being aggressive, and that is actually serotonin. So if you have low levels of serotonin, you're more likely to be aggressive. Socially, we learn from others. This is called social learning theory. Parents teach their children both by word and by deed. And so, the kids hear the admonishments from their parents and the instructions, and then they see how they live their lives as well. And, and life is just basically a big practice arena. So for most people to see what works and what does not. Now, sometimes what happens is you have cycles. So you could have cycles of goodness or cycles of badness. So unfortunately, if you have a dad who is an abuser of the wife, their children are more likely to do that as well. And if if the dad's a bully or the mom's a bully, their kid might be a bully as well. This is just part of the human existence. People want things, and then when we go after things, we bump into each other. And this wanting and this bumping causes conflict and frustration. And if you're in the frustration long enough, it leads to aggression and violence. This is called the frustration-aggression hypothesis. That frustration from an unmet goal inevitably ends in anger and action and aggression. Now, this is true, and I think we all have experienced this. It doesn't inevitably have to end that way, though. I think time dissipates the intensity and the anger. Sometimes people just grow up and they get a different perspective on life, and so I would kind of say it doesn't always have to end up with aggression. Of course, negative experiences produce negative feelings. Anytime you go to the DMV, it's like, I'm like, do I want to go to the DMV or get a root canal? It's just you're very frustrated by what's going on there, and it causes you to react in necessarily negative ways. Culture sometimes will promote aggression. I think many of the gangs in LA or in Chicago or in New York, whatever it is, to be aggressive is actually to be strong, and to be strong is to be a survivor. You also get it in more private, spheres such as home and actually in the office too. And it feels good to be mad sometimes. And we'll talk about this later today, but there's a fleshly part to it that, we repress so long we want to release. And, sometimes the situation allows for that. Sometimes it's actually an artificial means, such as drugs or alcohol or sports events. These things actually add to the aggression factors. So people live in all, every person lives in a culture, and the culture actually influences people by what they show them and what they have them listen to and watch. And so America, American television, American movies are all about violence and sexuality. So it's no wonder that people are, prone to respond that way. There's a desensitization that goes on to the behavioral extremes by watching, these movie after movie after movie where there's aggressive behavior, both physically and sexually. And the sadness is people also become desensitized to other human beings. And I think in part this is a kind of self-serving because it allows them to do whatever they want to with the person if they dehumanize them. And so it's kind of a definitely a self-serving bias against the other person. So Castanet all in their chapter talking about solutions, and of course, understandably, it's about self-awareness, both culturally and individually. It's about further research on the topic, and it's about implementing programs for the social problems to prevent the issues before they actually have happened. So the Chady textbook includes a chapter by Andreas Schneider where he talks about symbolic interactions linked to aggression, that people act toward things based on the meaning assigned to them. And of course, that meaning is a very personal thing. It's very personal insight or interpretation that gives the meaning its definition and its value and its prioritization. So meaning to many people, such as like Cooley, Mead, Simmel, Weber, Kant, etc., is not objective. The Gestalt of the event, of the thing, creates the inner meaning, the perception, the cognition. So some people could experience the very same thing and come to two very different meanings about it. And of course, and everybody, receives stimuli from outside of them. And this, then they have to respond to. And it could be a social phenomenon. It also could be a natural phenomenon. And these things can be observed, quantified, and qualified to an extent. You have that. And that's called social learning theory. It's like kind of how we learn to live and act in society. And sometimes, we learn consciously, directly. Sometimes we learn subconsciously or indirectly. Schneider goes on to talk about different scholars in the field, such as Cooley, Mead, Strauss, Goffman, Becker, etc. And also, Schneider talks about the different schools and theories, from the very conservative to the kind of more radical. So you have like Chicago School, Iowa School, and Indiana School. You have that. Schneider goes on to talk about the cybernetics models of identity, kind of like a postmodern sort of approach to aggression, understanding, and basically looking at how things are, what they should be like, and how we can get them to be changed. So, and of course, all that relates to symbolic interaction. He touches upon deviance, talking about, deviance explains the diversity of sexuality, gender, emotion, and other, diverse sociological aspects. And those are kind of a radical individualism thing, which we'll talk a little bit later. But we live in a radically individualistic society, and that promotes deviance and diversity. So, the articles focused kind of more deeply upon the aspects of aggression. The Grietmeyer, Sagioglau, they focused on how a person's socioeconomic status leads to more frustration, and then the more frustration leads them to be more prone to aggression. Lerea, Samara, and Volk, they actually talked about, very interesting topic, parental and how parent treatment or neglect of children can either enable them to be a bully or enable them to be a victim. So very, very interesting. So overall, though, we got to talk about, how does this relate to being a Christian? Well, Christian culture revolves around Jesus Christ and the Bible. We see in the Bible different stories of people interacting with each other. We learn about communal codes for coexisting. I think the Ten Commandments is a wonderful example of that. But also within and throughout the Old and New Testament there's a thread, a golden thread of a deep personal faith, of individualism, that we are to choose God on our own. So, as a Christian and living in a Christian culture, traditionally, you needed to follow an orthodox traditional message, which included exclusivity of beliefs about Jesus Christ, and then a peaceful universal inclusivity. And this is the part that actually relates to aggression, is that to be a Christian is to be ethical, and that means living with each other in love, peace, forgiveness, and submission. In fact, Matthew 5 says, "Blessed are the peacemakers," or the peacekeepers. You have that, because ultimately it's all about the love of God, and Jesus came to help the sinners. We are all sinners, so he brought the light to us, and we are therefore to bring the light to other people. And and we're to use him as our model. And he was concerned for the wholeness of people. He came to earth to forgive and heal them and bring about reconciliation. But he also did expect and demand a change of heart and behavior. There had to be repentance. You had to move from the bad to the good. You had to move from aggression to kindness and to love. You had that. And that was his social prioritization. And, it was also his method of operation. So, and you get this in the greatest commandment, where he says, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And later on, Paul talks about in Ephesians that we're to be mutually submissive, living by the Spirit, but not by the flesh. So the two questions I have for you, first is just consider the last time you encountered an aggressive person, and then, looking at, scholarly, articles and, relevant biblical verses explain, whether the hostile response came from an internal or external force. Like, was it a product of socialization, or was it just a natural response? And the second question is, there's a lot of aggression and hostility between foreign people and foreign powers. It's nothing new. So, what are some secular solutions and insights for facilitating international relations, especially between antagonistic parties such as the people of Israel and Palestine? So, thanks for listening. You guys have a great break. God bless.